A man is lying on a dirty mattress in a rusted trailer. The windows are cracked. The floor is covered in empty bottles. Outside, the wind rattles the thin metal walls. Nobody has checked on him in days. Nobody even knows where he is. This is not a homeless man who never had a chance. This is not someone who was born into poverty and never escaped. This is a man who once held a check for $315 million in his shaking hands. This is a man who once stood in front of cameras with tears of joy pouring down his face. This is a man who said, on live television, that he was going to take care of everyone he loved. And yet here he is, alone, cold, gone. How does a person fall from the highest mountain in the world to the very bottom of a ditch? How does $315 million not buy a single person who will check if you are still alive? That is the question that will haunt you long after this video ends. And when you find out the answer, you will never look at money the same way again. His name was Gerald Muswagon. And before the money, before the tragedy, before the darkness that swallowed him whole, he was just a regular man trying to survive in a cold Canadian town. Gerald grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba. If you have never been to Winnipeg in winter, imagine stepping into a freezer and being told to stay there for 5 months. The city is beautiful in its own way, but life there for a poor family is hard. And Gerald's family knew hard very well. He was raised in a working-class home with very little to go around. There was no extra money for luxuries. There was barely enough for necessities. Gerald grew up watching his parents stretch every single dollar until it nearly broke. He learned early that life was not going to hand him anything. He was going to have to fight for every penny. And that is exactly what he did. As a young man, Gerald worked with his hands. He took whatever jobs he could find. He worked in construction. He worked in labor. He hauled things, built things, fixed things. He was not afraid of sweat. He was not afraid of hard work. He had rough hands and a tired back and a laugh that people said could light up a room. Those who knew him in those early years remember a man who was generous even when he had nothing. If a friend needed a few dollars, Gerald would hand it over without thinking twice. If someone needed help moving furniture or fixing a truck, Gerald was the first one to show up. He was that kind of person, the kind of person the world needs more of. But life had not been kind to him in return. He struggled with money constantly. He struggled with direction. He was a good man living a hard life, and most days it felt like no matter how hard he worked, he could never quite get ahead. He had children he loved deeply. He had people counting on him, and he carried that weight every single day. He did small things to try and get ahead. He played the lottery sometimes, not because he believed he would win. Most people who play the lottery do not believe they will win. They play because for a few days, before the numbers are drawn, they get to dream. They get to imagine what their life could look like. They get to feel the possibility of something better. And Gerald was no different. He would pick his numbers. He would hold that little ticket. And for a brief and beautiful moment, he was free. The night of November 26, 1998, changed everything. Gerald Muswagon played the Super 7 lottery. He sat with his ticket. The numbers were drawn. And one by one, each number matched. His heart must have stopped. His hands must have trembled. The room must have gone completely silent except for the sound of his own breathing. He checked the numbers again. And again. It was real. Every single number matched. Gerald Muswagon had just won $315 million. Let that number sit in your mind for a moment. $315 million. That is not just winning the lottery. That is winning the lottery in a way that most lottery winners will never experience. That is generational wealth. That is more money than most people could spend in 10 lifetimes. That is the kind of number that does not even feel real when you say it out loud. And for Gerald, standing in that moment, it probably did not feel real. He reportedly ran through the neighborhood. He knocked on doors. He shouted the news. He could not contain it. He could not hold it in. His joy was pure and loud and completely unfiltered. His family was in shock. His friends were stunned. The people who had watched him struggle for years suddenly saw the impossible happen right in front of their eyes. He hugged people. He laughed. He cried. He laughed again. In that moment, every single hard year, every exhausting job, every stretch of poverty, all of it seemed like it had been worth it. Because here was the reward. Here was the miracle. Gerald chose to take a lump sum payout. After taxes, he walked away with approximately $17 million. Now you might think, $17 million is still an incredible amount of money. And you would be right. $17 million, managed wisely, is enough to set an entire family up for generations. It is enough to buy a beautiful home, invest smartly, live comfortably, and still have money left over for your grandchildren's children. Gerald knew what he wanted to do. He spoke publicly about his plans. He was going to take care of his family. He was going to buy everyone he loved something wonderful. He was going to make sure nobody close to him ever struggled again. He wanted a big house. He wanted nice things. He wanted to finally exhale after years of barely breathing. It was a beautiful dream. And for a little while, it really did seem like a dream come true. He bought a large home. He bought trucks. Shiny, expensive trucks that gleamed in the Manitoba sunlight. He bought things for his children. He bought things for his parents. He handed out cash like it was something he had always had in abundance. And why not? He was Gerald Muswagon, the lotto winner. The man who had beaten impossible odds. The man who had gone from nothing to everything overnight. People celebrated him. People loved him. His phone rang constantly. His house was always full. There was always music. There was always food. There was always laughter. For a brief and electric moment, Gerald was living the dream that most people only ever see in movies. But underneath all the joy and noise and celebration, something very quiet and very dangerous was beginning. A crack was forming, and nobody was paying close enough attention to see it. The first thing that changed was the people around him. When you have money, real money, the kind that makes headlines, people appear from everywhere. Old friends you had not heard from in years suddenly remember your birthday. Distant relatives you barely know show up at your door with stories about how much they always believed in you. New friends materialize out of thin air, full of warmth and laughter and an endless enthusiasm for being wherever you are. Gerald was a generous man. He had always been generous. But now his generosity was being tested in ways he had never experienced before. Every time he said yes to someone, 10 more people came asking. Every time he helped one family member, 3 more arrived with their own needs and their own emergencies. The money was flowing out of his life faster than water from a broken pipe. But Gerald kept smiling. He kept giving, because that was who he was. The parties at his house became legendary. And when people talk about legendary parties thrown by lottery winners, they rarely mean elegant gatherings with good conversation. They mean the kind of gatherings where everyone is taking from the host and giving very little back. They mean the kind of nights that end with people passed out on couches and the refrigerator completely empty and the host standing in the middle of it all wondering when exactly his home became a free hotel. Alcohol became a fixture. Then it became a crutch. Then it became something Gerald reached for when the noise got too loud and the requests got too heavy and the loneliness. Yes, the loneliness that hides inside every crowded party became too hard to ignore. People saw him drinking more. People noticed. But nobody said anything. Because when you are the one with the money, the people around you are rarely brave enough to tell you the truth. His relationships began to fracture. The stress of managing so much money, combined with the constant pressure from family and friends, took a serious toll on his personal life. Arguments happened. Trust was broken. The people who were supposed to be his foundation started to feel more like strangers wearing familiar faces. Gerald had wanted the money to bring everyone closer together. Instead, it was pulling everything apart at the seams. He made financial decisions that experts would call catastrophic. He did not hire a financial advisor. He did not put systems in place to protect the money. He spent freely and gave freely and believed, as so many lottery winners tragically believe, that $17 million is a number so large that it simply cannot disappear. He was wrong. Numbers that large can disappear. And they disappear faster when you are surrounded by people who are helping them go. Imagine waking up every morning and not knowing who in your life actually loves you. Not knowing if the person sitting across from you at the breakfast table is there because of you or because of your bank balance. That doubt is corrosive. It eats through trust like rust through metal. And Gerald began to feel it deeply. The smiling faces around him started to look different when he looked closely enough. The people who had been at every party suddenly had opinions about how he spent his money. Family members argued over what they were owed. Friends felt entitled to things he had never promised them. The man who had once been so full of joy was starting to feel trapped inside the very life he had dreamed of building. The money had not set him free. It had built a different kind of cage, and the door was beginning to close. Within a few years of winning, Gerald's financial situation had become alarming. The money was going out, and very little was coming in. He had not invested wisely. He had not protected his assets. The trucks were depreciating. The big house came with enormous costs. The lifestyle he had built was expensive to maintain, and the stream of people coming to him with their hands out never slowed down. Gerald, to his deep credit, could not stop caring about people. Even as he watched the money drain away, he kept giving, kept trying to help, kept believing that generosity would somehow come back to him. But generosity without boundaries is not virtue, it is destruction. And Gerald was destroying himself $1 at a time. People who watched from the outside could see it happening. But Gerald was inside the storm, and inside a storm, it is very hard to see anything at all. His drinking deepened into something much darker. Alcohol had started as a social thing. Then it had become a comfort. Now it was becoming a necessity. He needed it to sleep. He needed it to face the day. He needed it to quiet the voice in his head that kept asking the same terrible question over and over. How did this happen? How did I go from having everything to feeling like I have nothing? The cruel irony of Gerald's situation was devastating. He had more money than almost anyone he had ever known. And yet he felt more lost, more alone, more afraid than he had ever felt during his years of poverty. At least when he was broke, he knew who his real friends were. At least when he was broke, the people who sat with him, not with his bank account. The money had not solved his problems. It had revealed new ones. Problems he had not known existed inside of him. Problems that no amount of cash could fix. There were legal troubles. There were disputes. When a person loses control of their finances, the legal system tends to follow close behind. Gerald faced issues that compounded his stress and his sense of helplessness. Every new problem felt like another stone being loaded onto his back. He had walked into a lottery office carrying almost nothing. And now, just years later, he was being crushed under a weight that nobody had warned him about. The people who had celebrated with him were gone or changed. The family relationships that had once been warm were strained or broken. The home that had been full of music and laughter was quieter now. The trucks were gone. The money was nearly gone. And the man who had once knocked on neighborhood doors screaming with joy was now a man who some days could not find a reason to get out of bed. By the mid-2000s, Gerald Muswagon was in genuine crisis. The $17 million was gone. Every last dollar. He had given it away. He had spent it. He had watched it be taken, in some cases, by people who had never truly deserved to be in his life. He had made decisions that could not be undone. And the sober reality of that, the cold, heavy reality, settled over him like a permanent winter. He moved. More than once. Each move took him somewhere smaller, somewhere less. The big house became a smaller rental. The rental became something smaller still. He was a man falling through floors, and each floor he fell through was harder than the last. He tried to work again. He tried to rebuild something. But the combination of his struggles with alcohol and the psychological devastation of losing everything made forward progress nearly impossible. He eventually moved in with his parents for a period. Think about that moment. Gerald Muswagon, the man who had once handed his parents gifts with his lottery winnings, was now moving back in with them because he had nowhere else to go. His parents took him in, of course, because they were his parents, and that is what parents do. But what must it have felt like for Gerald to cross that threshold? To put down whatever small bag of belongings he had left and to stand in his childhood home and understand, fully, completely, without any hope of denial, that everything was gone? The money, the lifestyle, the crowd of friends and hangers-on who had surrounded him for years. All of it completely vanished, leaving behind only the hollow echo of who he used to be before that lottery ticket changed his life. In September of 2005, Gerald Muswagon was found dead. He was 46 years old. He was found in a garage on his family's property in McGregor, Manitoba. The cause of death was hanging. He had taken his own life. The man who had once held a check for $315 million. The man who had screamed with joy and run through his neighborhood, sharing the most incredible news of his life. The man who had wept happy tears in front of cameras. That man died alone, at 46, with nothing left. His death was not just a tragedy. It was a shattering, soul-shaking reminder that the things we believe will save us can sometimes be the very things that destroy us. The money had not protected him. The money, in many ways, had been the beginning of the end. The people closest to Gerald were devastated. His family, who had watched him fall and had tried to help him get back up, now faced the grief of losing him entirely. His children grew up without their father. The friends who had genuinely cared about him, the real ones, the few who had been there before the money and tried to stay after, carried the weight of his loss for years. The community that had once celebrated him fell silent. Because what do you say? What do you say about a man whose greatest joy became his greatest curse? There are no easy words for a story like this. There is only the silence of people who loved him, sitting with the terrible knowledge that nothing they did was enough to save him. News reports about Gerald's death made brief appearances in Canadian media, but the world moves fast. Headlines fade, and before long, most people forgot about Gerald Muswagon. They forgot the screaming joy of that November night in 1998. They forgot the images of a working man, a laborer, a father, holding proof that the universe had decided to give him a miracle. And they forgot how that miracle became a slow-motion disaster that ended in a garage in Manitoba on a September afternoon. But we should not forget, because Gerald's story is not just his story. It is a story about all of us, about what we believe money will do for our lives, about the gap between what we think we need and what we actually need, about the loneliness that can grow like a weed even in the richest soil. So why does this happen? Why do lottery winners, people who receive more money than they ever dreamed of, end up in situations like Gerald's? Psychologists who have studied this phenomenon say the answer is both simple and deeply complex. When a person's financial situation changes dramatically overnight, their social identity changes with it. Suddenly, they do not know who they are anymore. The structures that held their life together, work, routine, relationships built on shared struggle, all of those things change or disappear. The community that once surrounded them treats them differently, and they begin to feel like a stranger inside their own life. Money does not come with instructions. It does not come with a therapist. It does not come with a warning label that says, "This substance can be dangerous to your sense of self." There is also the issue of trust. Gerald had always known who his real friends were because he had nothing to offer them except himself. When the money arrived, that certainty vanished. Every relationship became suspect. Every gesture of warmth came with a question mark. And when you cannot trust the people around you, you become isolated, even in a crowded room. Isolation, combined with stress and grief and the crushing pressure of being seen as the person who will solve everyone's problems, that is a combination that breaks people. It broke Gerald, not because he was weak, but because he was human. And the human mind is not built to carry the weight that winning $315 million places on your shoulders. The saddest part of Gerald's story is not the money. It is the love that got buried under it. Gerald was a man who loved his family. He loved his friends. He wanted to take care of people. That desire, that impulse, it was one of his greatest qualities. But nobody taught him how to protect himself while caring for others. Nobody sat him down and said, "Gerald, it is okay to say no. It is okay to protect what you have. It is okay to put yourself first sometimes, so that you can continue to be there for others." Instead, he gave until there was nothing left to give. And then he gave some more, until the only thing left to give was himself. And even that, in the end, was taken by the darkness that had been growing inside him for years. If there is a lesson in Gerald's story, and there must be, because his life demands that we find meaning in it, it is this. Money answers very few of the questions that truly matter. It can pay your bills. It can buy you comfort, but it cannot buy you belonging. It cannot buy you peace. It cannot undo trauma or fill the spaces inside you that were left empty long before the money arrived. The things that sustain a human life, real connection, purpose, identity, mental health, those things are not for sale at any price. And no lottery ticket, however large, will ever change that fundamental truth. Gerald Muswagon deserved better. He deserved someone to sit with him in the middle of all that chaos and say, "You do not have to do this alone. You do not have to figure all of this out by yourself." Picture Gerald on that cold November night in 1998, running through his neighborhood, banging on doors, screaming that he had won. Picture the pure, uncomplicated joy on his face. He was not thinking about taxes or advisors or social pressure or alcoholism or loneliness or the long, terrible road ahead. He was just a man who had been struggling his whole life, holding a ticket that said, "Today, you get a miracle." Remember that man, because that man was real. The tragedy that followed was real too. But so was the joy. So was the love. So was the warmth that people who knew him in those early years still remember. Gerald Muswagon was more than a cautionary tale. He was a human being. He was a father. He was a friend. He was a man who ran through the cold Winnipeg night with his heart so full of hope that it must have felt like it would burst. He won $315 million. And he lost everything that mattered. Rest in peace, Gerald. You deserved so much better than the world gave you. And if you are watching this right now and you are struggling, not with lottery winnings, but with life itself, please know this. You do not have to white-knuckle your way through the darkness alone. There are people who want to help. Reach out to them, not because you have money to give them, but because you are worth knowing. You are worth saving. And no amount of loss, financial, emotional, or otherwise, changes that truth. Your value was never in your bank account, and it never will be.